Okay, so let's do a video on my very favorite topic of all, Hatsune Miku. I have been a very big fan of Hatsune Miku for a long time, and this video is probably overdue, but I've got things I need to say, and unfortunately, this is going to be a little bit of an odd video because there is no sound, as you can probably tell. Sega has blocked any recording of sound through the PlayStation 4's native hardware, probably to prevent licensing issues and all that kind of stuff, because Japan tends to be very strict on the music licensing side of things. And that means that it's impossible to record sound of this game, or these games in particular, without having specialized recording hardware and all that kind of stuff, which I don't have. I use the PlayStation 4's inbuilt recording tools for all of my videos, and unfortunately that means that you're just going to have to watch this video about a rhythm game series without any music. But of course, if you haven't played the Hatsune Miku games before, you should anyway. They're amazing games, and the music is great fun, and I've got nothing but good things to say about them. So yeah, I mean, if you haven't experienced these games and this music before, then you probably should, is what I'm saying, and you shouldn't need the music in the first place. Anyway, that's not the topic of the video, so let's get on with what I actually have to say. So a bit of history first up. Hatsune Miku. If you don't know who Hatsune Miku is a vocaloid. Now, a vocaloid is a piece of software that you install on your computer, and then you go into the software and you type lyrics down and it sings it back to you. So using this software, you can create basically pop music or any other genre of music, really. You can create music, and then instead of having somebody actually sing the lyrics that you write, you have a vocaloid perform them for you, which is a much cheaper way of getting a vocalist to do a music song for you than actually hiring a vocalist. And that really kind of resonated quite well and popular with people, partly because the company that created the Miku software, a company by the name of Krypton, they also created this character, which is what you see in front of you. Now, the character was designed as a mascot to kind of represent the software, and she became very popular, to the point that there are now thousands and thousands and thousands of songs that use Miku's voice, and most of those songs are actually commercial songs and all of that kind of stuff. So there's a big industry with dozens and dozens and dozens and hundreds of people creating music using this software. There's full concerts, and I'm talking, when I say concerts, I mean they've actually got technology which creates a holographic version of Hatsune Miku on a stage, so you get the full live performance experience with a full live backing band, all of that kind of stuff. It's huge. It's a really, really big deal. And one of the things that really helped make it a big deal was Sega. Sega in 2009, so 2 years after Hatsune Miku actually came into being, created the first Project Diva game. It was for the PSP, and it was a little rhythm game, basically. And since then, Sega has been very, very good at supporting Miku by releasing all kinds of games. There's a very popular arcade game. There's a number of games on the PlayStation 3, Vita, PlayStation 4, a couple of titles on the DS and 3DS, sorry, and then a mobile game as well was also produced by Sega. And all of those games have been coming out fairly frequently, every year or so, and that accumulated in a port of the arcade game to the PS4, which is the one, not this clip, but you will see other clips of it as we go along in this video. And that port went down really well with people because it has hundreds and hundreds of songs on it. It was supported with DLC, which brought even more music, and it was a really, really good game, really well made game. So Sega's been very good at supporting Miku and turning her into one of the major rhythm game franchises, and that has really kicked on with Miku in general and her popularity in not just in Japan but all the rest of the world. It's a big reason that there are so many people that go to the concerts, for example. When I'm at a concert, and I have been for the last 3 years, there are always people playing Miku games on their Vita. Obviously they're fans, otherwise they wouldn't be there in the first place, but it's obvious that a lot of them came to Hatsune Miku because they started playing the games, which is just like me. I didn't know who Hatsune Miku was before I played the first PlayStation Vita rhythm Project Diva game, and from that point I became a huge fan, and I started to buy the music, the merchandise, and all that stuff. I have dozens of figures of Hatsune Miku on shelves in my house. I've got 30, 40, maybe even 50 now music CDs. I've got the works, so I have a lot. I've even got a Hatsune Miku doll which Cost me more money than I care to admit on air. And it's a big thing. So you go to Akihabara, for example, in Japan, or Nakano Broadway, or anywhere where kind of otaku geek culture is a big thing, and you'll find at least as many Hatsune Miku figures or merchandise or goods as you would. What's some good examples? One Piece has a lot of figures, for example. There would be at least as many Hatsune Mikus. Or Love Life was a big deal. It's a little bit less now, but it was a huge deal, and everywhere there was Love Life stuff in these places in Japan. Hatsune Miku kind of tracked along with that. So Miku is a huge deal in Japan. And actually, it goes beyond that. I remember seeing a photo, for example, when Shinzo Abe was in the process of, it was an election year, and he was on the campaign trail and all that kind of stuff. And because Hatsune Miku is such a big deal in Sapporo, which is where the company that created her is based, he was actually pictured holding a Hatsune Miku toy. And I'm sure he didn't really know who she was, but she's a major part of the economy in Sapporo, and she's always on TV. Miku's always on TV, and there are increasing rumors that they'll find a way of including her in the 2020 opening ceremony or closing ceremony. She'll be part of the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo. So yeah, like I said, Miku's a really, really big deal, and she's a big deal in part because Sega did such a good job with building the culture around her in those early days. And then, you'd have to imagine that Sega's been, rewarded in kind as Hatsune Miku has grown in popularity. And I know if you look at the sales charts for the PlayStation 4 in Japan, Project Diva Future Tone, which is the one you're now seeing on the screen in front of you, the port of the arcade game to the PlayStation 4 was very popular, sold really, really well. And because of that, you just have to imagine that it's become a major franchise for Sega. It's become a big part of its business. And unlike Sonic, poor old Sonic, unlike Sonic, these games are actually good and popular, and people like them, and people buy them, not just because they feel some kind of obligation to support Sonic. Poor Sonic. So that was a very long-winded introduction, but the reason I did it was because I wanted to kind of really drive home the point that Sega and Hatsune Miku's owner, Krypton, have had a really good relationship over a very long period of time now, and have been, it's been a very mutually beneficial relationship. Sega's created some great games that have sold really well, and that's really helped Hatsune Miku develop into this major global property that she's become, and that's made Krypton a lot of money, which in turn has then fed new fans into the video games, which Sega's been able to capitalize on as well. It's been this really kind of happy, virtuous circle, and it's been good for both companies, which is why it's odd and a little bit concerning, I guess. It seems like Sega and Krypton have not completely split, have not gone separate ways, and certainly nothing public has been announced as such. But it would seem that the licenses that Sega has had over Hatsune Miku have weakened, if not disappeared, completely. And there's a couple of reasons for that, and that's the purpose of this video, is to kind of go through those. The first one is the really obvious one. It's been a long time since Sega has announced a new Hatsune Miku game. The last new Hatsune Miku game, not including a VR one, which I'll get to in a moment, the last new Hatsune Miku game was Project Diva X. Now that one was announced 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know, can't remember exactly when, but I do remember playing the first demo for it at the first Hatsune Miku concert that I went to, which was 3 years ago. So it's been a long time since that game was in development, and it was released, and I think it did okay, probably did better in Japan than the West, of course, but it was developed for the PlayStation Vita and PlayStation 4, and it was the first Miku game on the PS4 and all that kind of stuff. There was one released afterwards, which I've talked about a little bit before, which is Project Diva Future Tone, but that is just a port of the arcade game. So it's nothing new. The last new Miku game that Sega developed was Project Diva X. There was a experimental title, or a series of experimental titles, I guess you could call them, which was the VR Future Live games. I think that's the subtitle. Those ones were developed for the PlayStation VR headset. But they weren't really games. They were more kind of concert experiences where you put the headset on and you got the full 360 view of the concert floor, and you could actually get up on stage, and if you were so inclined, dance and wave your arms around like crazy to with Miku sitting there right in front of you. Anyway, the point is, it was a VR experiment. It wasn't really a game, and it wasn't received particularly well either, it must be said. It was obviously done fairly inexpensively by Sega to just kind of, do their thing with VR and make sure that they're on top of it. When Sony was pushing it really heavily, there was probably incentives in there from Sony and all that kind of stuff. But again, the last new Miku game that the fans could latch onto as a new game by Sega is quite a few years old now, and we haven't had anything announced since. And Sega's been quite good at supporting newer platforms with these games as they've come onto the market. PlayStation Vita had a Project Eva game on it fairly quickly. PlayStation 4 had, as soon as they announced a new game, it was also announced for the PlayStation 4. There's been nothing to do with the Switch so far, for example, and a lot of people really want their Hatsune Miku on the Nintendo Switch. So all of that quietness is concerning, I guess, in a sense for fans, because it means that obviously there's nothing going on. We would have had an announcement if there was a new game in development as the last one finished. We would have had an announcement much sooner than this. So there's that. The other concern, or the other concerning point, is that previously Sega was the one that held all the licenses for the Hatsune Miku games. Like I said, there was a mobile game, all the console games, a VR game, all of that kind of stuff. Sega had all the licenses for it, almost exclusively. Or it was exclusive. But that seems to have changed. So there have been mobile games released, Hatsune Miku mobile games released that are not done by Sega, and the one Sega Hatsune Miku game is no longer supported. You can't even buy the DLC for it anymore. So it seems like mobile's right out for Sega. And then earlier this year, a company called Dejika Games, which is a small kind of publisher in Japan, was the one responsible for releasing a VR game for HTC Vive for PC. So the PC Miku game was also not produced by Sega. And just the way that licenses work, you can't imagine that Sega would be particularly happy with other companies creating Miku games unless they weren't as involved with the property anymore as they once were. So yeah, it seems like there's something going on with that franchise. Either Krypton is pulling away from Sega to look for new publishers' support or new game ideas or something, or Sega is no longer interested in producing Miku games because it's doing other things. I don't know, more Sonic games or something. Now, it must be said that there does seem to be ongoing support for the Project Eva Future Tone game, the arcade port, because there was a DLC pack released fairly recently which had additional songs and costumes and stuff in it, which was great. And if perhaps even if the licenses have expired in other areas, if Sega's idea is to continue to support Future Tone by continuing to release new music through that and make that as a kind of platform for its Hatsune Miku business going forward, then that's great. The one thing I really hope is that Sega doesn't go away from Hatsune Miku completely, for a number of reasons. Firstly, I do really like the games, as I've mentioned. The games are great. I've spent thousands of hours playing these games. I love these games. I don't want them to go away. But the other reason is so much of the Miku culture is actually built around what Sega's done with it. For example, at least half of my figures would be figures that have been created based on the arcade game, with the costumes and all of that kind of stuff. And actually, they end up in the UFO games, the claw collecting games. They actually end up as prizes in those in Sega's arcades in Japan. So if all of that was to go away, a big piece of what got me into Hatsune Miku in the first place, and why I continue to enjoy Hatsune Miku so much, would be gone, and that would be really disappointing. And I'd be really, there's also the chance that whichever company does produce the next Miku game doesn't do a very good job with it, and that would be very disappointing because it's not very easy to create a rhythm game. It's very difficult to create a really, really good rhythm game, especially one that has the kind of resources that Sega did to put video clips in the back of the action, because most rhythm games are very plain. They're very focused on the notes and all that kind of stuff. To actually build full animated cutscenes in the back and all of that takes a lot of resources. And not many Japanese companies have the kind of scale and resources that Sega does to do that. it could, if licenses are gone, if licenses are changing hands, if other companies are looking to create Miku games, it could of course work out for the better, and we might even get other genres. We might get a management game, or idol management game like Idolmaster or something. Maybe Bandai Namco picks up the license and does a Idolmaster Miku edition. I don't know, but the whole franchise seems to be in such flux, and that's, as a fan, that's always a little bit discomforting. You just don't know where things are going to go next. But I think I've pretty much said everything that I have to say about Miku. And I can't believe it's taken me this long to actually create a video about her. I'll probably be actually because the damn sound doesn't work in the background, and I know that's annoying. But anyway, thanks very much for watching this video. Let me know what you think about Hatsune Miku if you'd like, and we'll see you at the next one.